Oh, no, that was the other day, tells the burnout.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, like the first word here.
Oh, yeah. I am earlier.
All right, I got you. Keep your audio. Okay. Yeah, I charged them. Oh, sorry, no, it's not your. I got your. If you hover up there. That's it. You have to click in those squares. 551. There you go. And I printed some books for you too here. You got 7 more if you need them. Okay. All right, you're on your own. Just wait for him to show up. Good.
In the truck. Were you there last week for the first one? I ended up having to take my dad to the hospital, but however. With the dessert. Hello there. How are you? Better than nothing. Well, that's good. I see your hair is growing. Yeah. Is your son learning? What was he at? Oh, I have no idea. I haven't heard of practice. Okay. I was sorry to miss the first one. I'll have to go back and listen to it again. It's a video on the New Testament 3 and 5 guys. He does a look. I watched it and it just, it's like what happened, but it doesn't go into details. It's just like an overview. Yeah. Modern version of the dialogue. You remember that?
Oh, yeah, teacher? He just logged in and it ding dong, but he hasn't got video yet. There he is. There he is.
Hello.
Hey. So do I X out this box, Larry? Yeah, you can turn that, yeah, close that. Oh, John was worried that he was gonna have to teach for you tonight and
Maybe next week, okay? I need I need some studio lighting in here to take about 30 years off this face, I think, you know. How are y'all tonight?
Good.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Let's see here. Yeah, okay. See if we're got our stuff here. So I've been emailing all of you the are you getting that email with the graphics in there? You don't need them, but are you getting your email with that in there? Okay. Good. Good. So what was the temperature down in up in Michigan today?
50.
How many?
50.
Oh, 50. Well, that's what it was here too. Boy, you guys are you having a pretty mild winter?
Yep.
We hope so.
You've had some snow, a little snow, right?
Yeah, we had 2 cold weeks.
Did you? Well, this global warming is pretty nice, I guess, huh? From Michigan.
Hey, the South Pole just registered its coldest winter on record.
Oh, did it? Oh man. Well,
So there's your global warming.
it's warmer here most days, than you are. Naturally, we're further south, but sometimes the temperature is the same. Like today, it was about 50 today, I think, here. But bright sunshine. We have a lot of sunshine here in where I live here in Virginia. That was one of the things I noticed about, for some reason, I've heard people try to explain it because we're near the lake or something, or where we're at in Michigan, we get cloudy days, a lot more cloudy days. I don't know. Seemed like there was, in the wintertime, it was a lot of overcast days. But I notice here it's mostly sunshine every day, even the winter. So it's pretty nice. So has everybody been okay? Good, good. Well, pray for my wife. I don't know if did I mention it last week?
Yeah, I'm just asking, because you said you were going to the doctor in the town.
Yeah, she's going to a hematologist, and she had yesterday, she had a bone biopsy to see what's going on with her blood. And that was a little bit painful. She actually had it in the office. The doctor said you can do it in the hospital, we'll put you to sleep, or you can have it in the office. She took some Ativan they gave her to keep you calm and so forth. But she said, they took out some fluid and took out a piece of her bone. And when they were pulling the fluid out, it was painful and so forth. But she's doing well. She's doing well, but she does have something going on. So pray about that. Unfortunately, we're not going to get the results for 3 weeks. So 3 weeks from yesterday, because from various circumstances, the doctor's gone and so forth. So we'll be going in the office on the 20, whatever it is, 21 days from the 27th of February. So maybe I'll mention it, 3 weeks from today, see what they say. But pray for her. She's doing okay. It's just that this blood work is off. They're trying to figure out exactly what's doing. They did a lot of blood work, but the hematologist, it's not definitive about anything. They ruled out some things that it could be, but not really definitive on what's going on. I've talked to Pastor Ken about this, and he said, "Do you want to mention it to the church?" And I said, "Well, maybe we'll just wait till we get something definitive." But I thought I'll just mention it now to you folks and just pray about it, pray for her. But we'll see what they say. But it's going to be 3 weeks from the night I'll mention what's going on with her and that. So that's something we're pretty concerned about, obviously. Well, it's about 6:01. So why don't we have a word of prayer, and then we will begin tonight. Father, thank you for your grace and kindness to us through our Lord Jesus Christ. We're thankful, Father, that you have provided this great salvation for us, and that we can know you, and we know our lives are in your hands, and our future is secure. And that gives us great confidence as we live our lives here now. Thank you for this time together. We ask your blessing upon CBC and upon the classes that are meeting tonight. And we pray this all might be encouraging and helpful to us as we seek to know you and your word and to serve you in the days ahead. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. All right. So let me see if I can bring up, we're on page, actually, we're looking at the Assyrian captivity here, where we left off last time. C. We covered. We're on Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2. I think we covered the introduction, and then I don't know. All my pages are mixed up here now. What happened to the rest of them here? That's weird. I'll lose them. Oh, wait. Oh, there they are. Okay. We covered Roman numeral 1. We're on Roman numeral 2, history of the intertestamental period. So let me bring up the slides here, and we'll kind of review for a second what we and get into hit back to our history, try to quickly get through this if we can. Okay. So last time I said we're going to study various subjects. And one of the reasons we're looking at some of these areas is because if we think about it and look at the New Testament, we do see differences between what we found in the Old Testament and the New Testament. We see new religious parties, Pharisees, Sadducees. We see synagogues. We see rabbinic schools and rabbis. We see Greek culture instead of the Canaanite pagan cultures. We see a lot of different things. Rome, not Persia, is in control of Palestine, as we'll see tonight. Persia is the last empire before the Greeks, and so there's just a lot of differences. So we're looking at history. I just want to cover the history of that period first. Then we're going to talk about literature from that period, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. How does that affect anything, or does it affect anything? The Apocrypha, things like that. We're going to look at cultural practices, religious practices and parties, all these kinds of things that came about during the intertestamental period. So we're just kind of surveying the history here. I talked last time we started with David and Solomon. David becomes king over all of Israel, we said, you remember? And then the kingdom is divided after Solomon between the northern 10 tribes and the southern 2 tribes, Judah. The Levites, most of them fled south and became a part of that. So it's really not the full 10. But anyway, so you've got Israel in the north and Judah in the south. You've got Jeroboam and Rehoboam, 2 kings, and then 2 dynasties that come from that. And we looked at this chart last time in your notes, the division of the kingdom, beginning with Jeroboam and Israel, Rehoboam and Judah. And these 2 kingdoms last, Israel lasts till 722 BC, when the Assyrians ultimately took ultimate control of Israel. And the southern kingdom, Judah, lasted until 586, when Babylon came in ultimately and destroyed Jerusalem, temple, and so forth. So that's the period of history that we're looking at now. The Israel was dominated from about 722 by various empires. And these are the ones that we're just going to kind of survey here. The Assyrian Empire is the first one we're looking at tonight, because as Israel was taken over by the Assyrians directly in 722, then the Babylonians conquer the ancient world, then the Persians conquer the ancient world. Then directly in the intertestamental period, the one that really influences Israel quite a bit is the Macedonian Empire, or Greek Empire, of Alexander the Great. And then particularly his, as the empire is divided, we'll see, that's a tremendous influence. Then the Jews gain independence. And they gain independence, and they establish a dynasty called the Maccabean, or the Hasmonean dynasty, but the Maccabees are the family. And this part of Jewish history is celebrated every December with the Jewish festival of Hanukkah that we'll talk about. And then, of course, the Romans come in, and 63 BC, and that's the empire that we find in control of Israel in the New Testament age. So let's talk about, see here, the Assyrian captivity. And we're looking at, this is a map of the Assyrian Empire. So we said during the time of David and Solomon, Israel was quite strong, and other kingdoms were weak. They didn't have a lot of difficulty with other great powers. But then Assyria, I won't talk about their development, but they ultimately became the most major power in the Middle East, in Mesopotamia, and along the Levant, or in Israel here in Palestine. And they control this entire area. So I mentioned here in C, in your notes, let me come out of that. Stop that share for a second here. I mentioned here in your notes that from 730 onward, Assyria, this large major power, was master over all this area that we have seen. And they really were controlling, in a sense, Israel and Judah. They were vassals of Assyria. But eventually, Assyria destroyed Israel in 722 when it rebelled. So Judah, they still paid tribute to Assyria, but eventually Israel rebelled. Assyrians deported 27,000 of the people of Israel and repopulated the area with foreigners. Now, this is all mentioned in 2 Kings 17. I probably should have said, read that, 2 Kings 17. It's kind of an interesting, it describes all this, what happened to Israel and how Assyria, what they did. But this is that last king that's mentioned in the notes there, King Hoshea, 732 to 722, about the last king of Israel. He was a wicked king, as most all these Israelite kings were. And Shalmaneser, who is the king of Assyria, comes in and attacks him, and he has to pay tribute to him and so forth like that. But then the Hoshea decides he's going to rebel against the Assyrians, and he makes a pact with the Egyptians and so forth. And Assyria finds out about this, and so they come in and just completely take over Israel, take over the land, govern it directly. And they take all these captives, 27,000 of the people of Israel, and they repopulate the land with foreigners. They bring people in to live there. Now, this was a serious practice. Well, it's an interesting practice and it makes some sense that if you conquer a territory and you're worried about them rebelling, you always got to worry about that. If you conquer someplace and you worry about it. There used to be these movies. There was one on TV, I can't remember it, or years ago, about how the Russians conquer America, and then this whole thing is about the Americans forming these guerrilla groups and rebelling and throwing out the Russians, something like that. But when you conquer a territory like that, you've always got to worry about these people rebelling and so forth. So the Assyrians had the idea, we're going to take you away from your land. So you'll lose your any identity you had. And the Assyrians took these Israelites away, and they brought people in. People from other lands they conquered, they brought in. And what happened was intermarriage between these groups. And these groups brought in their religion and their gods. The Second Kings describes the fact that there was kind of a mixture then. So what the people that come out of this are called the Samaritans. We'll talk about them later, but this is where the Samaritans come from. Remember, we see them in the New Testament. And the animosity between the Samaritans and the Israelites, so forth. We'll talk more about that. But this is the beginning, we think, of where the Samaritans actually come from. So in 722, Israel, this is the end of the northern kingdom, the northern dynasty, and so forth. And so that brings us to bring this back up again. What I'm talking about here on number 2 here, we could talk more about what happened with the Assyrians in Judah. The Assyrians were interested in taking over the kingdom of Judah. You remember that story, and that was King Hezekiah. So they were going to take Judah also, but they were prevented by the Lord. You remember 185,000 Assyrian troops were killed in a miraculous intervention by God, saved King Hezekiah and the nation. So God did not allow the Assyrians to take Judah. One of the things I wanted to mention here was, as I mentioned in number 2, that the Assyrians made the Aramaic language the lingua franca of the ancient Near East. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, lingua franca. It's kind of a common term that's used to describe the common language. So it's not something we've experienced much here in America because English has generally been the universal language. But in some countries, there are a lot of native languages, individual languages. India has a bunch of them. A lot of countries have a bunch of them. Tribal languages, but then there's kind of a universal language. In Africa, Swahili is in many places a kind of a universal language in many countries, but they have their tribal languages still. And so the Assyrians spoke a language called Aramaic. So we're thinking about Israel now and Judah. They speak Hebrew that we're familiar with today. And of course, the Bible is written mostly in Hebrew. But the most universal language during this period was a language called Aramaic. And this was kind of the universal language of the period. And this Aramaic, people who lived in various places, they began to pick this up. And this will become important to us when we get to the New Testament period. So this became the sort of universal language of the Middle East until the time of Alexander the Great, until we get to the 4th century. So for 1,000 years, at least, Aramaic was kind of the universal language. Aramaic is very close to Hebrew. This is called the Semitic family of languages here, this map. Linguists divide languages into various families because many languages are closely related, like English is an Indo-European. It's related to other Indo-European languages, like Latin or Greek or French, or there's some the commonalities there. German, they're all Indo-European languages. And so these are Semitic languages. They have a lot in common. Quite different from, say, English or Greek. In seminary, when we teach these languages to students, we always teach Greek first because Greek is easier for us to understand because Greek is has similar characteristics to English. And it has a lot of words. It has a lot of words. We have a lot of our vocabulary derived from Greek, but that's not true in Hebrew. There's nothing in our language that's derived from Hebrew, and the structure and the way it's formed is just so completely different. It's a more difficult process to learn that. And Hebrew and Aramaic are very close to each other. They're very similar. But that's the language that becomes kind of a universal language. And we can see that in 2 Kings 18. This is, after 722 BC. And this is the story of King Hezekiah. And Sennacherib, talks about Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, attacks the cities of Judah, captures some of these cities. And it says in verse 17 that the king of Syria sent his supreme commander, his chief officer, and his field commander with a large army from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. And they came up to Jerusalem and stopped at the aqueduct, the upper pool, and so forth. They called for the king, and Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, and the palace administrator, they all come out. And the field commander says to them, tell Hezekiah, this is what the great king of Syria says, that, you better surrender. You're in trouble here. You're depending on Egypt, but that's not going to help you, all this kind of stuff. They say, verse 22, if you're depending on the Lord our God, isn't he the one whose high places and altar Hezekiah removes? All this stuff. So then notice verse 26. Then Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, Shebna, and Joah said to the field commander, please speak to your servants in Aramaic, since we understand it. Don't speak to us in Hebrew in the hearing of the people of the wall. This commander comes down and he speaks in Hebrew so that everybody will understand it. He's going to frighten the people. He's going to say, hey, you're in big trouble. You don't stand a chance. And they say, well, speak to us in Aramaic. Not everybody understands Aramaic, but we do. It's kind of a universal language. And the educated people would understand it and so forth. And so he's just saying, don't tell the people what you're saying. You're going to scare them to death, and so forth. So this language of Aramaic, we'll see, becomes important to us because parts of the Old Testament are written in Aramaic. So Israel's gone. Israel's taken into captivity 722 BC. And now we come to Israel is left. And that's the Babylonian captivity. I say here that the Assyrian Empire weakened in the 7th century. And by 624 BC, Judah came under Egyptian control. So let me put that up again here. This is a kind of a map showing Babylon. So we had Assyria. I'm not showing, Assyria is still a major power. But there in that little green space that you see on the map is the origins of the Babylonian kingdom. Judah, as I say, comes under Egyptian control. The Assyrians are beginning to weaken. And there's Babylon. The king of Babylon is Nabopolassar, and he conquered the Assyrian city of Nineveh. So here's Babylonia here, and here's Nineveh up here. And it's hard to follow all these lines here. These are showing all these lines with arrows are showing the conquest. So what happens is Babylon really just conquers all the territory that once was Assyria. So and they have a series of battles. So in 612, Nineveh falls. That's the largest city in the ancient Near East. Then Nebuchadnezzar II comes along, and he conquers more territory. He defeats the Egyptians up here, north of Palestine, a place called Carchemish. He defeats the Egyptians, who are in control of Israel, Palestine, and so forth. And he comes down and takes Israel, and that's this red line here. You can see this red line. He comes down and he takes he captures Jerusalem. So he's coming down. He defeats the Egyptians here. He comes down. He captures Jerusalem, and you can see that chart on your notes there. Rulers during the time of Daniel. This is just because I'm going to refer to this right here in the notes. Nebuchadnezzar again. Nebuchadnezzar II. We just call him Nebuchadnezzar. So after the Babylonians are expanding here. They're taking Assyrian territory. They defeat the Egyptians at Carchemish. They come down. They come to Jerusalem. I say here they captured the best of the sons of the royalty and the nobles, including Daniel, Shadrach, and Meshach, and Abednego, among others. And Judah becomes a vassal of Babylon. So Judah was a vassal, sort of Assyria. Assyria tried to take them during the time of Hezekiah. They couldn't actually capture them because God intervened with that miraculous destruction of 185,000 Assyrians. But now Nebuchadnezzar comes down, and Judah becomes their vassal rather than Egyptians. The Egyptians' vassal, Egypt's vassal, becomes a vassal of Babylon. Then, as I say here in number 2, under the Babylonian captivity, Judah rebels against Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar attacks again in 597. So he comes down again and attacks one more time. Let me bring up this next slide here. I know this is hard to follow, so forgive me here, but these are just the times that Nebuchadnezzar comes down to Jerusalem. He first comes in 605. there's a red line here. I don't know if you can see this red. There's a red, green, and blue. So Nebuchadnezzar comes down here 3 times. The first time is at 605. After he defeats the Egyptian, he comes down, takes control of Judah, really. But Judah rebels against Babylon. So he comes again. That's the green line. There's a second line here. He comes down here again, and that's in 597. And he captures, King Jehoiakim, the queen mother, the prince, about 10,000 leading citizens. Smiths, craftsmen are taken captive to Babylon along with servants and plunder. So that takes the cream of the crop of the nation, in 597. Ezekiel was taken off to Babylon during that time. Nebuchadnezzar stripped the temple and the king's house of its valuables. He took them to Babylon. Zedekiah was installed as a puppet ruler, but he rebels. He rebels. And Nebuchadnezzar has another trip. That's the blue trip. So, I mean, he sends his troops down here one more time. In 586, that's the last time. He comes down in 586, an 18th month campaign. He seizes the city. He ends the Jewish monarchy in 586 BC. So the north falls in 722, and the south, Israel, falls in 586. In 586, the temple is destroyed. This is the temple. This is the first temple of Solomon, the temple that Solomon built, and this is destroyed in 586. The surviving leadership, what's left, is taken into captivity, deported to Babylon, and they lived there for 70 years. This is the 70 years captivity that we talk about. And what's left are mainly, poor people, people who are considered insignificant. They take the leaders, wealthy. They're allowed to remain in Judah, but they don't exert any political influence or anything. So Judah is pretty much devastated. As I say here under number 3, anyone who was rich or noble birth was taken to Babylon. Now, instead of being dispersed throughout the land, they're transported to Babylon and taken to certain cities. This map here kind of shows how they're taken, this red line here. They're taken to a number of cities in Babylon that I mentioned here. This is mentioned in Ezekiel and so forth. These various cities, Ezra mentions them and so forth. And what's interesting, they were sort of allowed to govern themselves in these cities. They were kind of given authority there to have these Jewish enclaves and to govern themselves and so forth. Now, in some ways, this was very difficult, obviously, for these people. They're taken out of their country and so forth. This is where apparently Psalm 137 comes from, this famous psalm. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the populace we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the songs of Zion? The songs of the Lord while in a foreign land. And so you get that idea that, it was difficult for them during those 70 years. But there's another side of that story that's interesting. They experienced a lot of well-being there. They had opportunities to rise in the government, like Daniel. Remember, Daniel is during this period. There's evidence that they were able to form their own council of elders. They had the advantage of prophets and priests in their midst and so forth. In fact, Jeremiah addressed the groups there, Jeremiah 29:1. And what's interesting about that, when they're allowed to return in AD 70, some of them won't leave. A lot of them won't leave. They've established a life there and they don't leave. And they're there till this day, or at least they were until modern times, until they got driven out, recently in the last 25, 40, 50 years. But a lot of Jews in Babylon there. This is where we'll see the synagogues originated, because you don't have the temple. So they set up these synagogues for the study of scripture. We'll see all that as we go along here. I mentioned in number 4 here, they adopted the Babylonian calendar. As I say here, the Babylonians had a 12-month lunar calendar. So a lunar calendar has 30 days each month. And, if you have 12 months of 30 days, that's 360 days. So you're going to have trouble pretty soon. You're going to be out of this, you're going to have the seasons are going to be way off. So what they do is every 6 years they adopt, as I say here, another month, an extra month, a second Adar. This is what the Jews do even to this day, because they're on this religiously, they're on this Jewish calendar that has a lunar calendar that's 30 days each month. And so they have to adopt another month. And the names, say, of the months in this Babylonian revision appear in the post-exilic books. So names like Nisan, Adar, and so forth. The Babylonians also, when they talk about days, they talk about evening and morning, which is interesting. The descendant of the Jews did this too. As I say, the synagogues developed during this period for the study of scripture and prayer and so forth. I say in number 5 here, the Hebrews switched from speaking Hebrew to Aramaic. We talked about that time in Hezekiah's period where these Assyrians come down and they're speaking Aramaic. The Jewish leaders know Aramaic, but now Jews, as their main language, tend to speak Aramaic, and Hebrew is still spoken. It's more for religious relief. They of course the scriptures are in Hebrew and so forth, but they spoke Hebrew until they were taken into captivity, and then in the Babylonian captivity they pick up this Aramaic language, which becomes important to us, obviously, because part of the Old Testament scriptures are written in Hebrew and Aramaic. 268 verses, as I say here in the Old Testament, are written in Aramaic. One verse in Jeremiah, some verses in Ezra, and some whole chapters in Daniel are written in Aramaic. Of course, Daniel is there in this time in Babylon and in Persia, as we'll see. And Aramaic is the universal language, the lingua franca of all this period. Now, Hebrew doesn't die out or anything like that. It's the language of scripture, but still it's a common language. As this term goes, the lingua franca of the ancient Near East. Apparently Aramaic was Jesus's first language. I say apparently because we don't know. Now, ultimately, Aramaic is displaced by Greek as the lingua franca, as we'll see. When the Greeks come in, when Alexander the Great comes in, Greek becomes the universal language of the ancient Near East. And so the New Testament is written in Greek because that's what most people spoke. Most people understood, especially Gentiles, would be Greek. But Jews spoke Aramaic. And so we know Jesus spoke Aramaic, probably spoke some Greek, too, spoke, maybe both. There's a lot of evidence that I don't have time to go into. There's a lot of evidence that people in that time spoke Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek. But we don't know exactly what his main language, but you'll usually hear Jesus's main language was probably Aramaic. But there's debate about that, a lot of debate about what was his main language that he would speak commonly day to day. So I've got a little chart there because we're coming in now to the Persian period. Now major periods within Second Temple Judaism. So we're talking about the destruction of the first temple, and now we're going to see the rebuilding of the temple, the Second Temple period. The Second Temple period, when you see people write about the Second Temple period, they're talking about the period when the temple was rebuilt. Zerubbabel comes back, as we'll see, rebuilds the temple in the 6th century, and then it lasts until the Romans destroy it. That's the second. So that's about a 500-year period, 600-year period, almost 600 years for the Second Temple period. So we're going to be looking at this Persian period, and then that's 539 to 331, about 538, 39. Then we're going to be looking at what's called the Hellenistic period. I'll explain that. That's when the Greeks, Alexander the Great and his descendants, his generals, his dynasties governed Palestine. And then the Jews established an independent kingdom, the Hasmonean period, the Maccabean period, and then the Roman period. These are the periods, again, that we're going to be looking at. So we're looking at the Persian period now, 539 to 331. So we had the Assyrians, they're the major power in the ancient Near East. That they give way to the Babylonians. The Assyrians conquer Israel. Then the Babylonians conquer Judah. That's the end of Israel and Judah. That's really the end of Israel until the Maccabean period, and it's reconstituted, the Maccabeans. And that's destroyed in 63. And then we don't have Israel again until 1948. So we're looking at the Persian period here, 539 to 331. Now, during this period, the Jews are allowed to return. Remember, I said the Assyrians had this policy, hey, if we want to keep these people from revolting, we're going to take the leaders, the political elites, the educated people, take them out of the country and move them far away and just leave the poor people, uneducated, and they won't be able to rebel or anything like that. The Persians had the opposite idea. They thought, hey, we're going to leave these people in their land and keep them happy. We're going to allow them to stay there. We're going to rule them. We're going to govern them, but we're going to actually let them rule themselves. We're going to let them govern themselves, sort of. So they had just an opposite idea of how to keep conquered peoples under their thumb. The Assyrians thought they could transport them. The Persians said no. And so it's under the Persians that the Israelites are allowed to return from the Babylonian captivity, because the Persians become the leaders of the ancient world, the Middle East, after the Babylonians. So you can see on that return from the exile, there are 3 returns there. 538 BC, we'll study that under Cyrus. Zerubbabel returns, the leader is Zerubbabel, and they come to rebuild the temple. Remember, Zerubbabel gets permission. That's a 20-year struggle, but after 20 years, this is Cyrus who says, you can return and build your temple. So Cyrus believed that was a good thing. Let these people worship their own gods. They'll be happy and so forth. And as long as they, don't do anything, don't try to throw off our yoke, it's okay. And then in 458 BC, Ezra, there's a return. Artaxerxes lets Ezra return. And they come to get the people back on track as far as worship at the temple and so forth. But the walls remain, walls of Jerusalem are in ruins. So there's really no protection in the city. And then in 445, Nehemiah returns. He returns to build the walls of the city, which they do, 445. So we have these 3 returns, 538, 458, and 445. And the first of these returns is Cyrus the Great, who, as we'll see, takes over from the Babylonians and decides to let the Jews return. So Cyrus is a Persian, and he's different from the Assyrians, the Babylonians. The Iranians today, the country of Iran, they are not Arabs. Iranians are not Arab. They're Muslims, but they're not Arabs. They consider themselves Persians. They speak Farsi rather than Arabic. So even though they're Muslims and they, they're still part of that, what we think of, there's quite a bit of differences there in the sense of what they consider their ancestry to be and the language they speak. All right, it's 6:40. That's when we're supposed to take our break, right? All right, let's take our break for 15 minutes and we will come back, and I got to get through this stuff quicker here. I'll talk faster. All right, thanks. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Can you hear me?
Cameron.
Okay. What's that?
We're ready to go.
Okay. Sorry. I was trying to get my AirPods to connect again here. All right. We're looking at the Persian period here. And that starts with Cyrus the Great. And let's just look at a chart here just to take a look at. So again, here's the Babylonian Empire in the green color. Another empire called Media. And Lydia over here. I won't talk about all this, but here's Persia. Here's where Cyrus starts. So again, we start with a small kingdom like Assyria, and eventually conquers this whole territory. Again, this is what this starts with Cyrus. This is in 559. So he inherits this territory around here, and he overthrows the king and the leader of Media in Ecbatana. So you see this arrow, these arrows are showing his battles where he conquered territory. So he first conquers the kingdom of Media, 559. 559, he takes over this area, Persia, and then 549, he defeats 549, 550 Media in Ecbatana. He travels all the way up to Lydia here. I won't talk much about that kingdom, but finally in 547, it says 546, 547, he defeats this, takes over this territory. So he's got all this here. And of course, Babylon is the largest king, the large kingdom here, most powerful kingdom. 539, he comes down and takes the city of Babylon, 539. So in 539, he is really taken over all this territory here, all the way up here, what we think of Turkey today, all the way through this area, all the way down here. Tremendous kingdom. So it's this, now we see it's in this green here, Cyrus's empire is all this territory here, all the way down here. So he incorporates Babylonian Empire into the, as I say here under Cyrus #1, he incorporates the Babylonian Empire into his new empire. And as I said before, he supported the recognition and restoration of the dispersed nations, allows them to return to their homeland. That's his policy. And the Jews return under Zerubbabel. Now, if you see this map here, you'll see two, kind of a purple line and a red line. So the first line here, the purple line, is Zerubbabel, the first return. That's 538, 539 BC. So here's Zerubbabel, the purple line. He returns. This is his route here. And he returns to rebuild the temple. He has permission to rebuild the temple. This red line we'll see is the second and third return. They follow basically the same route there, the return of Ezra and then Nehemiah to build the walls. So the first return here is around 538, 539. And this is Zerubbabel rebuilding the temple. This took, about 20 years to get this done. It started in 536, ceased in 530, and finally didn't begin again to 520. And then I mentioned on number 2 here, after Cyrus, then Cambyses, his son, takes control of the empire, and he conquers Egypt. That's why Egypt is shown in this color here too, because he's got all this territory, even Egypt. He conquers Egypt, and he has to return when an imposter comes on the scene. Let me stop here. Just a second. As I say here, imposter Gamada took the name of his dead brother and tries to usurp the throne. And so he has to return, but he dies returning home. The circumstances of what happened to him were unclear. Some people say he committed suicide rather than returning home. He thought he wouldn't win or something. But anyway, we next come to Darius. Some people say Darius. When I was in high school, I can remember our teacher said Darius, I think, but usually the preferred pronunciation is Darius, but people say Darius, Darius. And I mentioned he was one of Cambyses' officers, and he takes control of the army. He comes back to Babylon and puts down this insurrection, puts down the rope, puts himself on the throne. And he permits the Jews to return, another return here. Let's see if I can get this up here. He permits the Jews to return, and that's this red line we see here, a second return. He permits the Jews return and have us kind of finish the rebuilding of the temple. Darius tried to. This is what Jerusalem looked like. Just a map here to kind of show you Jerusalem at the time of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel comes to rebuild the temple. Here's the Temple Mount. Here's the city of David down here. Remember, this area down here is where David originally established his kingdom, and then Solomon had the Temple Mount here. This is the area of that was inhabited before the exile. This area over here was inhabited, and it is inhabited in New Testament times, but right now the city is small. It's been destroyed. So you have the city of David. You have this is the part that's inhabited. Now, there's no walls yet. There are no city walls here, no protection really. That's ultimately why Nehemiah is going to return. But so he allows the Jews under Ezra to return. As I mentioned here, Darius was interested in extending his territory to Greece. And he mounts a couple of expeditions. Here's the Persian Empire under Darius. You can see all this territory all the way to India. Tremendous empire. And this red line is showing his expeditions to conquer Greece down here. Now, this is Macedonia, which is not part of Greece technically. He conquers that, but they get that, but they're interested in taking Greece, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, cities like that we know about in Greece. And he mounts a couple of expeditions to conquer Greece in 492 and 490. You see, I don't know if you can see on this map here, but there's a little red dot here at Marathon. And this is a famous battle where the Athenians defeat the Persians, 490 BC. His first expedition was 492. Then he has this one in 490 here at Marathon, and that's, you remember, where we get the Marathon race from. The story goes that when Athens defeated the Persians at Marathon, they sent a runner back to Athens to tell the city, hey, we defeated the Persians. Remember that story? And he runs all the way back 26 point something miles, the distance of a modern day marathon. He runs all the way back. He gives the message and falls down and dies. Supposedly, that's the story. And from that distance, we have the modern marathon race there. Darius himself planned another mission, but he died planning that mission. He was succeeded then by his son, Xerxes. Xerxes the First, 486 to 465. He's mentioned in some Bible translations as Ahasuerus. That's his Hebrew name. And so in the King James Version, the New American Standard Bible, he'll be mentioned, like in Ezra 4:6, as Ahasuerus. He's the husband of Esther, Esther 2:1. So remember Esther in the book of Esther. He's the name. Xerxes is his Greek name. Xerxes is the name that the Greeks used to refer to him. So he's more commonly known in history as Xerxes, but the Hebrew name is Ahasuerus. As I say, he again tried to conquer Athens, but he failed in a naval battle. The Greeks defeated him at a place called Salamis, a naval battle in 480 BC. He was murdered by a usurper named Artabanus. This is another famous battle here because at least it's become, let me see if I can bring this up here. This is on the map here again. Here is this Thermopylae. I don't know if you can see this on the map here, but this red dot here is Thermopylae. There was a famous battle that the Persians won here at Thermopylae, but it's been immortalized because a group of Spartans, King Leonidas of Sparta, resisted this real large Persian force here at Thermopylae in this pass, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, they were able to stop they were just great warriors. They stopped the Persians from advancing there in this narrow pass, but then they got betrayed by a Greek man, and Epiphanes is his name, and he went over to the Persian side, and he showed them a pass around the mountain. They were blocked by the mountain, so they didn't know that they could They had to come through this narrow pass, but he showed them a way around it, and they were able to destroy the Spartans there, kind of in a famous battle there at Thermopylae. So, but he didn't take Athens. Ultimately, he was not able, he was defeated in naval battle, so they didn't, even though they won that famous battle, they weren't able to take over Athens. Then we come to Artaxerxes the First, 465 to 424. He's the son of Xerxes and the rightful heir, killed Artabanus, assumed the throne. And he's the one who allowed Ezra to really control things, to return and control things, become really sort of the ruler under Persia in Israel. There's that map again, that chart again that we showed. We had the first return under Cyrus, building a temple. Then the return under Artaxerxes, here with Ezra. This is the return I'm talking about right here in number 5. So he allowed Ezra, who was essentially the minister of all Jewish affairs in the region, to return in 458. That's Ezra 7 through 10. So Ezra returns 458, and then he allows another return under Artaxerxes. That's 2000. This is a small group under Nehemiah. This is Artaxerxes 2, also allowing in 445 Nehemiah to return to rebuild the walls of the city. And he was the governor of Judah, right? The governor of Judea. This is Nehemiah 1 and 2. So that's that red line we're talking about there, we've been talking about. So Ezra and Nehemiah are this red line. I'll get here in a second. And here is what Jerusalem looks like now under Nehemiah. So the walls are rebuilt here down the city of David, and the Temple Mount walls built around here and so forth. And so now the city is, fortified. It has walls and so forth. We come now to the period of Persian decline, as I mentioned, number 6, 424 to 300. There was a series of weaker rulers. The empires weakened. Egypt rebelled and rebelled from the Persians. They became independent again. Greece is becoming a world power now. Greece is coming on the scene, becoming a world power, and challenging, we'll see, the Persians. The last ruler I mentioned, the Persian Emperor Darius III, he was defeated by Alexander the Great in 330 BC. So now we come to the Grecian period. And this period, this culture and this group, of course, really affects the New Testament because, as you said, the New Testament is written in Greek. And that's all due to this man, Alexander the Great, 330 to 143 BC. So Alexander the Great, 336 to 323 BC. I mentioned here under Alexander the Great that about 350 BC, Philip II came to the throne of Macedonia. I remember I kind of flashed that little map up there of Macedonia. So there's what Greece looks like. You've got Macedonia up here. And there's not a country of Greece, not until Alexander makes it a country. It's just a series of city-states, a series of independent cities, sort of Athens, Corinth, Sparta. They controlled some territory, and they settled these islands. Athens have settled these islands along here, Ionia here. They have settlements here. These are all Greek settlements. So these are all Greek. They speak the Greek. They all speak the Greek language dialects. They have different dialects, Attic and so forth, and Ionic. They're all Greek. They're just slightly different, but they're still Greeks. Sometimes they work together to defeat a common enemy, like when the Persians invade. Sometimes they work together. Sometimes they're fighting themselves. They fight wars against each other. But anyway, so we have Philip of Macedon comes to the throne, and these city-states, he brings them all under his control. So he conquers all of this territory and makes a unified sort of country here. He's assassinated in 336 BC, and he's succeeded by his 20-year-old son, Alexander. Alexander, we call him the Great, of course, now. He was well-trained, well-schooled by Aristotle. And within a couple of years, he sets out to conquer the Persian Empire. So he's just controlling Greece, and now he's going to conquer the Persian Empire. He carries with him, he's a Macedonian, really. Excuse me, let me get a drink here. He's a Macedonian, but he's been schooled as a Greek culture, Greek language by Aristotle. He thinks the Greek way of life is the excellent way. And so he starts off to conquer the ancient world, and he does. This is the map of his empire here. And I have to get a cough drop here. My mouth's getting dry. I'm sorry about that. But that's his empire. It's really the old Persian Empire, and he conquers it all, takes it from the Persians. So he crosses over here into what we think of as Turkey today, and he in a series of battles, he defeats the Persians first here at the Granicus River, and then over here at Isis, and ultimately here. And so he has a series. So this is his line of where he is marching. He crosses here. He defeats the Persians at the Granicus River in 334. Kind of takes this territory, and then at Isis in 333. And so Darius III falls back, and so forth. And he marches down here. Alexander marches down into Palestine. And as I say here, according to the a Jewish historian, Josephus, we'll talk about Josephus. He was a Jewish historian, writer who lived during the time of Christ. He goes to Jerusalem, according to what Josephus says. He offers sacrifices in the temple. He's shown the book of Daniel that he was predicted to destroy the Persian Empire. Apparently, he accepts this interpretation. He grants the Jews' request that the Jews in Palestine, Babylonia, and Media be allowed to live under their ancestral laws, be exempt from tribute every sabbatical year. And that's the story that Josephus tells us. Assume it's true. He then goes into Egypt, goes that, establishes the city of Alexandria, a new city, city of Alexandria. He goes all the way, through here, all the way down to India, comes back to Babylon, where he ultimately dies. So as I say, he conquered most of the known world at 33, and apparently dies of a fever. That's one of the stories we know about it, that he died of a fever. He makes Greek the lingua franca. Remember, we talked about this thing about the lingua franca, the universal language. So Aramaic was the kind of the universal language spoken by the Assyrians, spoken by the Babylonians as the kind of, there were all kinds of local languages and tribal languages, but that's the kind of language of commerce and government, and the Persians. But now Alexander makes Greek the language, and that sticks during the New Testament period. As we'll see, I often wonder this because when I was in school here in Virginia a few years ago, in in the high school, I took Latin, and I always wondered, if the Romans spoke Latin, why was the New Testament written in Greek? Well, Greek still dominated, even in the Roman period, still dominated the ancient world. Latin eventually did, but it took until about the year 300 or 400. So it took about 300 years after Christ before Latin to become the dominant language in the world. Greek was still the universal language, even in the period when the Romans controlled Palestine and controlled the world. So Alexander speaks Greek, of course, brings Greek language, literature. He introduces Greek ideas, Greek culture, Greek gods. This is called Hellenism. So we'll talk a lot about that Hellenism. The Greek word for Greek is Hellene. So what is the Greek word? What is the Greek word for Greek? It's Hellene. So Hellenistic just means Greek stuff. So sometimes the language of the New Testament is called Hellenistic Greek. We call it Koine Greek because Koine means common or everyday Greek, but it's often called Hellenistic Greek. It's the Greek of the New Testament. It's the Greek that was spoken during that time. So he believed that the way to consolidate the empire, everybody has their idea. How do you consolidate the empire? Well, you have one culture, you have one language, you worship the same gods and so forth. One God, one law, one king kind of thing. As I say, he conquered Egypt. He established the city of Alexandria there. He forcibly moved a lot of Jews to come to Alexandria. He made them come there, and there's a lot of Jews in Egypt from that time on. I mentioned here in D, when he died in 323, there were these power struggles, and a lot of this went on for about half a century. But eventually, the empire was divided into 4 major parts. 4 generals and 4 dynasties were created. And we're interested in especially 2 of those. But here they are. So you've got 4 of these dynasties, as I mentioned here, in 301 BC. It's divided in 4 ways. Egypt and Palestine went to Ptolemy. So down here, this color, I never know what to call these colors. I just know red, green, orange, yellow, but this is something kind of orangey, reddish, whatever it is. My wife could tell us what this is, but I never know. Anyway, this color here is Ptolemy. So we're going to talk about the Ptolemies. And that becomes a dynastic name. This is named after a general, Ptolemy. And this becomes the Ptolemaic Empire here, this area. And so Israel is between here and this large greenish empire here. This is the Seleucids, named after Seleucus. So Seleucus is the general, Ptolemy is the general. This is the Seleucid Empire. This is the Ptolemaic Empire. Now there's 2 others here. There's Lysimachus, Thrace to Bithynia, and Macedonia and Greece to Cassander. So you've got this purple here, and you've got this Macedonia up here. But we're interested in the green and this kind of reddish, orangish, whatever it is, earthy color here. The Seleucids up here, sometimes called the Syrians. So we'll talk about the Seleucids or the Syrians, and the Ptolemies down here. Now, what's important to remember about these empires is that these are Greek-speaking people. These are Greek all the way. So you think about okay, these people called the Ptolemies, they began ruling here, in 301, about 301, 300 BC. And they're still in power when the New Testament comes around, Cleopatra and so forth. They're not Egyptians. They're Greeks. And they don't have much to do with the Egyptians. They have their own people who are running the government. They intermarry among themselves. They don't look like the Egyptians. They're Greeks. That's true all throughout this empire. So you have this kind of higher ups who run these kingdoms, and they're Greek. They speak Greek way of life, and they don't really mix that much with the population and so forth. So there's a lot of debate about that. You hear a lot about Cleopatra, and she's an Egyptian and so forth, but she's Greek. And she's thoroughly Greek and so forth. Now, so it's very interesting. They keep that Greek distinctive all through these 300 years. Now, Palestine, Israel, is caught between those two kingdoms, between the Seleucids, north of them, Syrians, as we talked about, and the Egyptians, the Ptolemies. They're caught between those two kingdoms. So the Ptolemies have Alexandria as their capital down in Egypt, and the Seleucids are centered in Syria, and they have Antioch as their capital. So here's Antioch up here, and we know about the city of Antioch quite a bit from the New Testament period. Here's Antioch. It's named after Antiochus. Antiochus is a name of a dynastic name for the Seleucids kings, Antiochus. And so you've got the Syrians up here in Antioch, and you got the Ptolemies down here in Alexandria, and they're vying for control of this. This is important land. It still is today. If you want to travel, you don't want to travel over here in the desert. You want to travel down to Egypt, you want to travel this way. This is the true trade route is down through here, down through Gaza and all that. So they're fighting over this, and that's what we're going to be looking at here. So we're looking at number 2 here, the Ptolemaic rule. The Ptolemies are in control from 323 to 198 BC. Remember, the Ptolemies are just down here. So from 323 to 198, this is what the map looks like. Just like this. The Ptolemies are in control of Israel, of Palestine. As I say here, Ptolemy was a Macedonian companion of Alexander. He ruled Egypt. After a while, he designated himself as Pharaoh of Egypt, Ptolemy I, Soter, Savior. And he established this Ptolemaic line. He founds this library of Alexandria, this tremendous Alexandrian library. Very famous library of Alexandria. Unfortunately, it burned in a fire centuries later, but very important library there. He's resettled many Jews in Alexandria, and as I talked about, they ruled Palestine until 198 BC. So 323 to 198, Israel's under control. Now, the Jews fared very well under the Ptolemies. They had to pay tribute to the Egyptian government, the Ptolemaic government there, but they had a high degree of self-rule. The high priest and a council of elders ruled over Israel. They ruled over this province, and they, according to the Mosaic law. So it was a Jewish kind of kingdom, a Jewish rule under, the Ptolemies and so forth. So it continues the situation that Ezra established. Ezra comes back, restores Jewish practice and so forth, Jewish law, and it gets the Israel right on the right track again. And during this time, Jewish men would make their 3 visits to the temple, just like the Old Testament requires that all males come to Jerusalem 3 times a year for those 3 feasts. Those Jews who lived out in the diaspora away from Jerusalem would pay a temple tax, a half shekel for maintenance of the temple. So the temple was maintained, Jewish institutions were maintained. It was during this time, during this time of 323 to 198, that the Old Testament was translated into Greek. Now, this translation into Greek is called the Septuagint. We'll talk about that. It's a very important translation. Tremendously affected the New Testament and New Testament Christians, because when Paul takes the gospel out to Corinth, people in Corinth don't speak Hebrew. They don't read Hebrew. They can't read a Hebrew Bible, but they can read Greek. That's their language, so they can read a Greek, just like us. A Hebrew Bible doesn't do most of us any good. We need an English Bible. Well, people in Corinth needed a Greek Bible. Well, that Bible was translated during this period when the Ptolemies were in control. It was translated during the reign of Ptolemy the second ruler here, who reigned from 285 to 247, 285, 247. And so commonly you hear people say, okay, about 250. Probably translated a little earlier than 250. But anyway, this Greek translation is very important because it influences the New Testament too, as we'll see. And so that's the Ptolemaic Empire. Now, I've got a little chart there. I'll stop here. You can see Seleucid kings and Ptolemaic kings, Jewish leaders and so forth. So we're on the right side there, the Ptolemaic kings. Ptolemy the first, Ptolemy the second, Philadelphus I talked about, who is 285, 246, where the Septuagint was started and translated. And they continue to reign in Egypt, but they lose control of Israel eventually, of Palestine, and the Seleucids take over. And so next, we'll look at the Seleucids taking over in 198, and they begin to control. And that's where we get into some real trouble for Israel. They suffer. They did well under the Ptolemies. They were left kind of alone, but when they get to the Seleucids, then it's a real problem. All right. Thank you so much. It's about 7:32. Thank you for your attention. And Lord willing, we'll see you next Wednesday night.
No.